most likely scenario is that Russia will test how much of a concession the United States will be prepared to make. It will be too much for Ukraine, and the war will continue for some time to come.
Well, first, we've been waiting for more details about the US-Ukraine materials deal. Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to go to Washington on Friday to sign it. Reports suggest that the initial demand that the US get $500 billion of profits has been dropped. Instead, mineral profits will go to a fund which will be used to benefit both countries. It's also reported that security guarantees are not part of the deal. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, told Times Radio Breakfast that he hoped it would lead to a lasting peace in Europe. Professor Malcolm Chalmers is Deputy Director General at the Royal United Services Institute, and he's with me to help me assess that claim. Professor, do you share that optimistic outlook?
I do not. I think we're in a situation right now where there's a lot of talk, I think, about security guarantees to Ukraine as part of a deal. But the one thing that Russia will not want is a situation where Ukraine is partitioned along more or less current lines, and then free Ukraine is then safeguarded by the West, becomes part of NATO effectively, which is what a security guarantee would mean, and is free to do exactly what Putin has been fighting this war to prevent. His purpose in this war all along has been to prevent Ukraine's continuing as an independent sovereign state, able to decide its own destiny. It's not been about getting a little bit more territory in the Donbass. That's only a means to an end. And I fear that because the Trump administration is sending a rather clear signal that it wants to end this war quickly, it wants to get out, it's not interested in continuing support for Ukraine, then that doesn't provide an incentive for Russia to make a deal that doesn't meet its maximum demands. So I think the most likely scenario, who knows, but the most likely scenario is that Russia will test how much of a concession the United States will be prepared to make. It will be too much for Ukraine, and the war will continue for some time to come.
You could always guarantee the end of a war by either winning it or giving it up. I guess that is both of those eventualities will have been considered by Donald Trump. Do you think he is politically in a position whereby if he gets very little concession from Russia, he can simply withdraw American support altogether? Sure, he can do that in theory, but do you think he's got the support inside his own administration and particularly inside his own party and country to do that?
I think one of the things that's clear comparing this Trump administration with the last is how dominant the president is. He's the decider. So people like Marco Rubio and others, they spatter all their comments with continuing references to the wisdom of the president and the fact that he is the ultimate decider. You know, I think we don't know what's going to happen. Of course, nobody can predict, but I don't feel safe in making an assumption that if Mr. Putin doesn't accept an initial American proposal, then America will continue the recent level of military assistance to Ukraine. I think there's a lot of worry in Ukraine that they won't. I think it's more likely that Trump will say, not a penny more for Ukraine, and we'll leave it to the Europeans to pick up the bill.
And how do you assess, as a final question, the coherence of the European response? There's been a lot of concentration on what Donald Trump has been saying, but obviously a very large part of Ukraine's support comes from Europe, more actually than comes from the United States, at least financially. So how do you assess the coherence of the European response? Are all the leaders facing in a different direction?
No, I think they're coming together. There's a lot of progress has been made over the last couple of years, and even more progress in recent months. But other European leaders are also held back by their own domestic politics. Macron is very weak. We're in the process of a leadership transition and coalition talks in Germany. So the two biggest economies in the European Union are being held back by domestic politics. And the UK plus the most exposed states is not quite a big enough coalition to defend Europe without the United States. So a lot. I mean, I think money is less of a problem. I think the money can be found to support Ukraine. Indeed, Ukraine finances a lot itself. But the more sophisticated and technological you're talking about, the more difficult it is. And it really, with the United States, is not even prepared to sign a resolution saying Russia is the aggressor at the Security Council.
Professor Chalmers, thank you very, very much indeed for that explanation. And that helpfully sets us up to discuss with Alexei Goncharenko, a Ukrainian MP who's with me, a member of the Ukrainian delegation to the Council of Europe. It helps, that previous contribution helps set us up for the question of whether or not this is really a deal, Alexei, or whether or not it's more of a heist.
Hello. Finally, there is a text now in Ukrainian media. If you look at this text, it's a kind of a deal to make a deal. So it's not very concrete. It's nothing concrete there. It said that there will be next deal, which will be much more concrete, and this next deal should be ratified in Ukrainian parliament. So it looks like now we are more, like accepting to speak further and to look for some kind of deals. What is important, there is nothing there about that we need to pay for the previously received American support, which was at that time and officially and juridically claimed as a grant, and mostly Ukraine has not received any money, but just weapons, also including old stuff from the United States. So that is good, but what will be next, we will see. If we're speaking about the deal, we need to have United States on our side. We are very concerned and worried about recent developments in position of the United States. I think this is just emboldening Putin and emboldening other tyrants. That's how it moves now. I hope and I count on meeting of Prime Minister Chalmers today with President Trump. I think that can be a very, very important meeting. And I hope that Prime Minister Chalmers will explain to President Trump why Ukraine matters, why Europe matters for the United States. Because like Trump said, there is an ocean between United States and Russia, and there is just Ukraine between Europe and Russia. That's true. So for Europe, it's much more important, but Europe is important for the United States.
I wonder whether there's any relationship that President Trump will accept that still involves President Zelensky. Do you think this relationship is now so poor that one of them will have to give, and inevitably at the beginning of a Trump term, that means Ukraine finding another leadership? Or do you think that is giving in to a completely unacceptable sort of rhetoric from President Trump?
I don't want to deepen the crisis that we have already in our relationships with the United States by giving some assertions and anything like this. Definitely, Ukrainian president can be elected only by Ukrainian people, and only Ukrainian people will decide who will be our next president in next elections. By the way, in 2019, when Zelensky ran for the president for the first time, he promised publicly and officially, it's in his program as a candidate, that he will not run for re-election, that he's running just for one term. Even this one term is already prolonged. So, but that will be his own decision, Zelensky's decision, and then it will be decision of Ukrainian people for whom to vote.
Okay.
Speaking about President Trump, we saw that he said that he is going to meet with Zelensky maybe even on Friday. So it looks like he is ready to speak, he is ready to communicate. Definitely, I think there is some bitterness now. But we're not in kindergarten, so it's not about personal relationships of two men. It's the fate of tens of millions and probably even hundreds of millions of people is dependent. So it's much more important.
Alexei, thank you very much indeed. Alexei Goncharenko, thank you very much indeed for that description of feeling inside Ukraine and strategic thinking in that country.